After supporting his fiancée's education for 5 years, she dumped him for a richer man. 1 year later, she came back begging, "Jake, we are not in the same class anymore. You're just a poor construction worker, and I need a real man who can take me higher." Those were the venomous words Emily Hart spat across the ballroom floor on her graduation night, her laughter sharp enough to slice through the man who had carried her dreams on his back for 5 years. She had no idea the poor construction worker she humiliated that night wasn't just her past, but her only bridge to the future. What happened next when the truth surfaced, and she came back crawling begging for a second chance, will change everything you think about love, loyalty, and betrayal. Viewers, what would you do if someone you sacrificed everything for stood in public and told you that you were beneath them? Would you forgive? Or would you walk away forever? The diner sat on the corner of a quiet Indianapolis street, its neon sign flickering against the night sky, the kind of place where time seemed to move slower. Inside, the smell of bacon grease and fresh coffee clung to the air, mingling with the low hum of conversation from late-night regulars. Jake Monroe pushed through the glass door, shoulders heavy from another long shift on the construction site, his boots carrying the day's dust, his shirt damp from honest labor. He wasn't the type of man who drew attention, except tonight, to the waitress who had served him often enough to know his rhythm. Emily Hart walked over with a tray balanced on her palm and an easy smile that seemed practiced for customers but softened just a little when her eyes landed on him. "Let me guess," she said, pencil tucked behind her ear. "Meatloaf with mashed potatoes and black coffee, no sugar." Jake raised a brow and leaned back in the booth. "You keep that up, you're gonna make me think I'm predictable." "You are," Emily teased, scribbling on her pad anyway, though she didn't need to. "Same booth, same order, same tired look. You're like clockwork." "Clockwork pays the bills," he replied, his voice low, steady, almost shy. She studied him for a moment longer than usual, noticing the rough edges of his knuckles, the calm way he held himself, despite the exhaustion written across his frame. Then someone called from the counter and she was gone, leaving him alone with his coffee and thoughts. It wasn't the first time Jake had seen Emily, but something about this night felt different. Maybe it was the rain streaking down the windows, the half-empty diner, or the way she returned to his booth during her break, sliding into the opposite seat without asking if he minded. "You look like a man who's carrying the whole world on his back," she said, sipping her soda, eyes locked on him like she was daring him to argue. Jake chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Nothing noble about it. Just a man trying to make it to the end of the week." Emily leaned her elbows on the table, her chin resting on her hands. "Most men I serve complain the whole time, even the ones with easy jobs. You come in after 12 hours swinging a hammer and still tip better than anyone else. So, either you're hiding something or you're the rare kind who knows how to carry weight without grumbling about it." Jake met her gaze, the corner of his mouth curving upward. "Maybe I just like being around people who notice the little things." For the first time that evening, Emily's smile wasn't part of the waitress act. It was real, unguarded, almost surprised. That smile lingered with Jake long after he left the diner, walking back into the damp night. He had no way of knowing it yet, but that brief exchange, simple as it seemed, was the beginning of something that would test every ounce of his faith in love, loyalty, and the cost of sacrifice. The weeks that followed their first late-night conversation in the diner unfolded in a rhythm that felt natural, almost inevitable. Jake returned after long shifts, and Emily always found a reason to linger at his booth a little longer, teasing him about his predictable order, asking about his day, letting their conversation stretch beyond the small talk of waitress and customer. Soon, it wasn't enough to just see each other across the counter. One Friday, when the rain finally gave way to clear skies, Jake waited outside the diner until Emily's shift ended. He stood by his old pickup truck, hands in his pockets, unsure if she'd actually take the offer he'd muttered earlier that week. "Maybe we should grab a bite somewhere that isn't this diner." To his surprise, she walked out with her jacket half-zipped, smiling like she'd been waiting for him. They started with simple things: pizza slices shared on the hood of his truck, long walks through quiet streets, conversations that went deeper with every night. Emily told him about her family, a mother who worked retail, a father who'd been laid off when the factory downsized, younger siblings who leaned on her more than they realized. She admitted that she'd always been the one with big dreams, the girl sketching buildings in her notebooks when she should have been paying attention in math class. Jake listened the way few people did, not just nodding but watching her face, asking questions that showed he cared. And one night, sitting in the park under a broken street lamp, she finally admitted what weighed on her the most. "I want to study architecture," Emily whispered, almost like she was confessing a secret. "Not just community college, I mean really study. A university program, 4 years, the whole thing. But that's not something people like me can afford. Not with the way things are at home." She tried to laugh, but her voice cracked. "It's a stupid dream." Jake reached for her hand, rough calluses brushing against her softer skin. "It's not stupid. And it's not impossible." She shook her head. "Jake, tuition alone is—" "I don't care about the numbers," he cut in, his tone firmer than she'd ever heard. "If you want it bad enough, I'll figure out the rest. I'll pick up shifts, cut back, do whatever it takes. You focus on studying, and let me carry the weight." Emily's eyes glistened in the dim light. "Why would you do that for me?" Jake hesitated, then spoke with the plain honesty that defined him. "Because I believe in you. And because I love you, Emily. That's enough." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the hum of the city in the distance. Finally, she leaned against his shoulder, whispering, "Then I'll make you proud." That night sealed something between them. Jake had made a promise, and promises were sacred to him. He didn't know it yet, but the decision to carry Emily's dream on his back would shape not just her future, but his own heartbreak. Jake's alarm went off before dawn, the shrill buzz filling his small apartment. He rolled out of bed, joints aching, feet already sore before they hit the cold floor. By 6, he was at the construction site, swinging a hammer in the biting wind. By late afternoon, he was under the hood of a car at the garage across town, grease staining his hands black. Every dollar mattered now. Tuition wasn't just a bill. It was a mountain he had decided to climb for her. He cut corners in his own life to cover Emily's costs, canceled cable, packed peanut butter sandwiches for lunch, wore his boots until they split at the seams. When overtime came up, he was the first to raise his hand. When an extra night shift opened, he took it without question, and when payday came, most of his envelope went straight into Emily's tuition account. Emily saw pieces of it, but not the whole picture. She knew he was working long hours, but Jake never let her see the exhaustion in his face. He smiled through the weariness, brushed off her questions with simple answers. "It's fine, Em. Don't worry about me. Just keep studying." When she left Indianapolis for Chicago to begin her architecture program, Jake packed her boxes into the back of his truck, drove her to the city, and carried them up 3 flights of stairs to her small apartment. He kissed her on the forehead and whispered, "This is your start. Make it count." Then he drove back alone, the silence in his cab louder than any radio. The weeks turned into months. Emily adjusted to campus life, lecture halls, studio projects, late nights sketching blueprints. She sent Jake photos of her designs, messy lines that slowly turned into structures. He kept them pinned on his fridge like trophies. But as her world expanded, Jake's world shrank to routine. Work, sleep, save. He skipped gatherings with friends, stopped buying small luxuries for himself. At night, he sometimes sat in his dark kitchen, staring at the numbers he'd written on a scrap of paper, rent, tuition, utilities, and wondered how long he could keep it up. Then he'd fold the paper, tuck it in his wallet, and set his alarm for another day. Emily noticed the sacrifices, but not always in the way Jake hoped. When she called, her voice was often distracted, buzzing with excitement about new friends, professors who praised her ideas, classmates who talked about internships in firms with glass walls and rooftop views. Jake listened, proud, but also uneasy. He belonged to a world of steel beams and sweat, and she was stepping into one of sharp suits and champagne. Still, when she said, "Jake, I couldn't do this without you," he believed it, and it fueled him. One night, exhausted, Jake fell asleep at his kitchen table. Emily's latest sketch crumpled beneath his hand. The drawing was of a skyscraper, tall, gleaming, untouchable. He smiled in his sleep, not realizing how prophetic that design would become, a symbol of the distance that would grow between them. Chicago felt like another planet to Emily. The glass towers, the late-night studio sessions, the professors who praised ambition. It was everything she had once only dreamed about. For the first time in her life, she walked through crowded halls certain she was meant for something bigger than the diner where she used to serve tables. Jake was still there, but only in glimpses. On weekends, he made the 2-hour drive, dropping off groceries, repairing whatever was broken in her apartment, slipping folded cash into her textbook so she would find it when she needed it. He never complained, never reminded her how many double shifts it took. His pride came only from hearing her talk about her designs, her grades, her future. But as Emily's world grew sharper and brighter, she began to blur Jake out of focus. In conversations with classmates, she rarely mentioned him. When friends asked who paid her tuition, she changed the subject. A man in dusty boots and patched shirts didn't fit the image she was carefully curating. Then came Derek Lawson. She met him at a networking mixer, surrounded by architecture students eager to make connections. Derek, 32, stood out immediately, confident, well-dressed, quick with a smile that carried weight. He introduced himself as a supervisor for one of the largest construction firms in the city, Jacob Carter. Emily recognized the name. Half the skyline bore its imprint. Derek had the kind of presence that made people lean in. He spoke about high-rise projects and luxury condos like they were casual details, and when he flipped through her sketches, he nodded with a mentor's approval. "You've got vision," he told her. "Stay close to the right people and you'll go far." Those words mattered more than he knew. Emily, hungry for validation, began noticing Derek everywhere, at expos and coffee shops, at guest lectures. He always seemed to appear with the right gesture, a cappuccino when she was tired, an invitation when she felt left out, introductions to people she thought were out of reach. Meanwhile, Jake's visits grew shorter. He was exhausted from working 2 jobs, his voice carrying fatigue even when he tried to sound cheerful. Sometimes when he called late at night, Emily let it ring. She told herself she'd call him back after studio, but she didn't always remember. Derek noticed the gap. He stepped into it with ease. Expensive dinners, small gifts, promises of influence. He hinted at internship opportunities, letting Emily believe he could help shape her future. Jake, still in the dark, kept driving down every weekend, kept folding cash into her books, kept believing in her dream. Emily, slowly, quietly, began to believe her future no longer included the man who had carried her this far. The first year passed with Jake carrying more than his share of weight. He was up before dawn swinging a hammer at one site, and by late afternoon he was covered in grease at the auto shop. His body ached, but his pride in Emily kept him going. On weekends he drove to Chicago, groceries in hand, ready to fix whatever was broken in her small apartment. Emily always smiled when he showed up, but it wasn't the same smile as before. Her phone buzzed constantly with group chats from classmates, invitations to networking dinners, deadlines from professors. She hugged Jake, thanked him for everything, but her eyes drifted quickly back to her laptop or phone screen. Jake didn't complain. He told himself it was normal. She was chasing her dream and he was proud to stand behind her. But the distance grew. Emily's weekends filled with social events she insisted she had to attend for her future. Her friends were sharp, ambitious, dressed in designer jackets and heels. When they noticed Jake's worn jeans and work boots, Emily brushed it off with a quick, awkward laugh. Derek Lawson was there more often now. He called Emily the future of design and treated her sketches like precious works. He brought her into circles she never thought she'd touch, parties in high-rise condos, Meetups with young professionals, places where Jake's calloused hands and quiet nature would never fit. At first, Emily justified it. Derek just knows people, she told herself. It's not personal. But every cappuccino he bought her, every gift he slipped into her bag, every night he whispered that her talent was wasted on people who couldn't elevate her, she let it sink deeper. Jake, meanwhile, worked harder than ever. He skipped meals so her rent was always paid, wore the same boots until the soles gave out, and swallowed his exhaustion so she wouldn't see how much it cost him. When he called late at night, she answered less often. Sometimes she texted, "Sorry, babe, busy, I'll call tomorrow." Sometimes she forgot entirely. One weekend when Jake drove down with a bag of groceries, Emily wasn't home. Hours later, she walked in, her hair styled, her heels clicking on the floor. She carried a shopping bag with a designer logo. "Where were you?" Jake asked gently, setting the groceries on the counter. "Out with classmates," she said quickly, brushing past him. Jake noticed the bag but didn't ask. He noticed the new earrings, too. He didn't know Derek had given them to her. Emily told herself she still loved Jake, that he was kind, dependable, the reason she'd gotten this far. But the more she looked at Derek's polished suits and expensive watch, the more she wondered if love alone was enough. The line between gratitude and obligation blurred. Jake became the man she thanked, Derek the man she admired. Jake still believed her heart belonged to him. He had no idea he was financing a dream that was slowly pushing him out. Jake arrived at Emily's graduation with his best attempt at looking polished. His shirt was crisp, though not new, and his boots had been scrubbed clean until the leather cracked. He carried a small velvet box in his pocket. Not a grand car key or a high-salaried contract, just a delicate gold necklace he had saved for over months. To him, it was everything. The ballroom buzzed with celebration. Professors toasted, students clinked glasses, families cheered for the graduates. Emily sat among them, her white dress catching the light, her laughter ringing out in ways Jake hadn't heard from her in months. Beside her was Derek Lawson, sharply dressed, smiling like a man who knew he had already won. Jake swallowed the bitterness in his throat and waited for his moment. When the glasses stilled and the chatter softened, he stood with quiet pride. "To Emily Hart," he said, his voice carrying enough to reach every corner of the room. "To the woman who spent 5 years proving she could climb every obstacle in her path. You've worked harder than anyone I know, and I couldn't be prouder. Here's to the future we build together." For a second, the room went silent. Then Emily laughed. Not kindly, but sharply, the way a person laughs when they've already decided they're done. "Jake," she said, her tone smooth but loud enough for everyone to hear, "we are not in the same class anymore. You're a good man, but I can't tie my future to a construction worker who will always be stuck in dust and sweat. I need a man who can take me higher." The words landed like bricks against his chest. Jake's hand went to the box in his pocket. He didn't open it. He didn't speak. Derek leaned back in his chair, his smile widening as though Emily's words had sealed his victory. A few of Emily's friends exchanged uneasy glances, but no one interrupted. Jake set his glass down, his pride the only thing holding him upright. "Then congratulations, Emily," he said quietly, his voice stripped of anything but finality. "You've graduated." He turned and walked out, the necklace still hidden in his pocket. Behind him, the applause picked up again, shallow and forced, as though nothing had happened. Emily lifted her chin and smiled for the cameras. She told herself she had chosen wisely, that Jake was her past and Derek was her future. What she didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that the man she had just humiliated wasn't the poor construction worker she believed him to be. And the future she thought she had secured with Derek would soon collapse before her eyes. Jake didn't look back when he left the ballroom. He didn't wait for Emily to follow him out or hope for her to change her mind. He stepped into the Chicago night, his boots echoing against the pavement, the city lights casting long shadows that swallowed him whole. By the time he reached his truck, his decision was made. He had carried her dream for 5 years. Tonight she had shattered his in less than 5 minutes. There was nothing left for him here. But Jake didn't drive back to Indianapolis. That chapter of his life was closed. He drove across the river, deeper into the city, where skyscrapers towered like sentinels in the dark. His truck rolled through quiet streets until it pulled into a private garage beneath a glass tower. The security guard nodded as Jake passed, a man who was no stranger to this building. By the next morning, the man the world thought was just a construction worker was back in his true world. Tailored suits, boardroom tables, and a name that carried weight. Jacob Carter, CEO of one of the city's most powerful construction firms. But to Emily, Jake simply vanished. In her world, there was only Derek now. He filled the empty space with smooth words and polished charm. He called her the future of design, and told her she belonged in the world of steel and glass, not with men who came home with calloused hands. One evening on a rooftop bar overlooking the skyline, Derek leaned close, his voice dripping with confidence. Jacob Carter Construction is expanding. They're hiring new architects. Don't worry, I'll make sure your application gets noticed. Stick with me, and you'll be inside before anyone else. Emily's chest swelled with pride. Finally, she thought, she was about to step into the world she had dreamed of, thanks to Derek. She clung to his promises, ignoring the cracks in his charm. The nights he left her early for meetings, the way he always talked more about himself than about her. She didn't notice how her new friends whispered when Derek's back was turned, how some rolled their eyes at his exaggerated stories. She didn't care. What mattered was that Derek looked like the future, while Jake was just the past she had outgrown. Still, in quiet moments, a shadow of guilt crept in. The image of Jake standing with a glass raised, eyes steady even as she cut him down, returned uninvited. But she buried it, convincing herself she had chosen wisely. Meanwhile, Jake was far from gone. From his office on the top floor, he reviewed reports, signed contracts, and prepared for the next expansion of his company. He said nothing to Emily, made no move to interfere in her life. But when the list of applicants for the chief architect position crossed his desk, one name stopped him cold. Emily Hart. Jake leaned back in his chair, a slow breath filling his chest. The betrayal still burned, but now fate had handed him the perfect stage. He circled her name in red ink, and for the first time in months, he allowed himself the smallest of smiles. A year had passed since the night Emily laughed at Jake in front of the ballroom. She thought she had risen, that she was on her way to the future Derek promised. But when her application landed at Carter Construction, fate decided it was time for her past to meet her present. Emily walked into the towering glass building with her head high and her confidence carefully rehearsed. She had spent the night before choosing her outfit, pressing every crease, making sure she looked like the kind of woman who belonged in the offices of the city's most powerful firm. Derek had assured her everything was set. "With my word," he had said, brushing his hand across her shoulder. "You're practically guaranteed the job." She believed him. The receptionist greeted her politely, took her name, and led her to a waiting area. Emily sat among other applicants, but she barely noticed them. She was already picturing herself behind a sleek desk, her sketches framed on the wall, her name on a business card that announced she had arrived. When her name was finally called, she rose with poise, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she followed the assistant down a long corridor. Her stomach fluttered, but not with nerves. This was excitement. This was destiny. The boardroom doors opened. Emily stepped inside, her smile ready, her portfolio in hand. But the moment her eyes swept the room, her body froze. At the head of the table sat Jake. Not Jake in dusty boots and flannel, not Jake with calloused hands and weary eyes. This Jake wore a tailored suit, his posture commanding, his gaze steady. Papers were stacked neatly before him, and the executives on either side of the table deferred to him with quiet respect. "Miss Hart," the HR manager began, "please meet Mr. Jacob Carter, our CEO. He'll be sitting in on today's interviews." The word struck her harder than anything she'd heard in her life. Her knees weakened, her breath caught, and for a moment she thought the floor had shifted beneath her. Jacob Carter, CEO. All those years she had called him just a construction worker. All those nights she had mocked his dusty boots. He was the man behind this entire empire. Emily's mouth opened, but no words came. Jake didn't flinch. His eyes rested on her calmly, no anger, no smile, just the steady look of a man who had seen everything and no longer needed to explain himself. "Please have a seat," he said, his voice smooth, professional, giving no hint of their past. The other executives waited, oblivious to the storm raging inside Emily. She lowered herself into the chair, her portfolio trembling slightly in her hands. Questions began. They asked about her designs, her vision, her ambitions. Emily answered mechanically, her words stumbling, her rehearsed confidence shattered. Every time she glanced at Jake, her throat tightened. She remembered the groceries he carried, the long drives, the money he scraped together so she could sit here today. And she remembered the way she had cut him down at her graduation, telling him he was not her class. Now she saw the truth. He hadn't just been her class. He had been above it all along. The interview dragged on, but Emily knew it was over. When the final question was asked, Jake closed the folder in front of him. His voice was polite, detached. "Thank you, Miss Hart. We'll be in touch." It was dismissal wrapped in courtesy. Emily's hands shook as she gathered her things. She wanted to speak, to beg, to explain, but the words wouldn't come in front of the board. She rose on unsteady legs, offered a brittle smile, and walked out. As the door closed behind her, Jake leaned back in his chair. His expression never changed, but for Emily the weight of her choices pressed down with crushing clarity. Emily's heels struck the marble floor like gunshots as she left the boardroom, her pulse pounding louder with every step. The hall blurred, the faces of other applicants nothing but shadows. Her chest burned, her throat felt raw. Jacob Carter, not Jake the construction worker, not the man she had dismissed at graduation. Jacob Carter, CEO. She ducked into a quiet corridor, clutching the portfolio that now felt like dead weight. For a moment she pressed her back against the wall, struggling to breathe. The images came in waves. Him handing her rent money, fixing her sink, driving hours just to leave groceries on her table. Every sacrifice she had taken for granted, every kindness she had mocked. And she remembered her words. "We are not in the same class anymore." Now she understood the truth. He had been the class she could never reach. When the meeting adjourned, Emily waited by the elevator. Her hands trembled as Jake stepped out of the boardroom, flanked by executives who spoke to him with deference. He paused when he saw her, but his expression remained unreadable. "Jake," she began, her voice breaking. "No, Jacob." He dismissed the executives with a nod. They walked on, leaving them alone in the corridor. Emily's composure crumbled. Tears welled, her body sagged under the weight of regret. She clutched the edge of his sleeve. "Please, listen to me. I didn't know. I thought you were just a worker. I thought Derek—" Jake's gaze didn't soften. His voice was calm, stripped of warmth. "You thought wrong." Her knees buckled, and she sank to the floor, clutching his hand like a lifeline. The polished marble was cold against her legs. She sobbed openly now, the way pride abandons a person when there's nothing left to hold on to. "I made a mistake," she whispered through tears. "The biggest mistake of my life. You carried me for 5 years, you gave me everything, and I threw it away. Please, I see it now. Give me another chance. Let me prove I can love you the way you loved me." Her words echoed down the corridor, desperate, hollow. Jake didn't move to lift her. He looked down at her with the same calm he had worn in the boardroom. "You wanted a man who could lift you higher," he said. "So fly. Just don't expect me to catch you when you fall." Emily's sobs deepened, her mascara streaking down her face. The security guard at the far end of the hall glanced over, uncertain, but Jake raised a hand slightly. and the man turned away. Jake stepped back, freeing his sleeve from her grip. His footsteps were steady, unhurried as he walked toward the elevator. The doors opened, then closed, and he was gone. Emily remained kneeling on the cold floor, the weight of her choices pressing down harder than any failure she had ever known. For the first time, she understood what true poverty was. Not the lack of money, but the absence of loyalty when it mattered most. And no amount of begging would ever bring back what she had lost. Emily didn't hear from Derek for days after the interview. At first she thought he was busy, caught up in projects, or maybe embarrassed that his connections hadn't delivered as promised. She called, texted, waited outside the cafe where they usually met. Nothing. When she finally found him, it wasn't in a polished suit or at a rooftop bar. It was on a construction site wearing a hard hat and faded work gloves, shouting instructions to laborers. Her stomach sank as she realized the truth. Derek wasn't the influential executive he had pretended to be. He was just another worker, one rung higher than the rest, but still an employee answering to the very man she had betrayed. "Emily," Derek said when he noticed her. His face hardened. "You shouldn't be here. Look, whatever you thought this was, I can't help you anymore. The boss knows about your application. My name means nothing here." "Boss?" she whispered, though the answer was already clear. "Jacob Carter," Derek said flatly. "He runs everything, always has. I don't have the opportunity to see him because I was just a supervisor on the construction site." The words knocked the air out of her chest. She had traded a man who built empires for a man who borrowed shine from them, and now, even Derek had turned his back. Meanwhile, Jake's life continued with quiet strength. In his office overlooking the city, he moved through meetings and blueprints, his focus sharp, his heart steady. The pain Emily caused hadn't vanished, but it no longer controlled him. He had given her 5 years of sacrifice, and she had thrown it away for glitter. Now, he owed her nothing. One evening as he left the office, Jake paused at the lobby doors. Outside, the city glowed with neon and headlights, alive with ambition and noise. He thought of Emily, how once he had seen her as his future, how he had believed love could survive anything. He let out a slow breath and stepped into the night, lighter than he had felt in years. Emily's world, however, shrank. The friends who once celebrated her drifted away when they realized she had no powerful job, no glamorous partner, no influence to offer. The expensive gifts from Derek meant nothing when she couldn't pay her bills. Her apartment felt colder, emptier, every corner echoing with memories of the man who had carried her when no one else would. Sometimes she replayed the moment in the boardroom, the way Jake's eyes had held no anger, only finality. That calm haunted her more than rage ever could. She knew she would never again find someone who believed in her the way he once had. And in the silence of her regret, the truth cut deepest. She hadn't just lost a man. She had lost the only person who ever saw her dream as worth carrying. Viewers, betrayal doesn't always look like a dagger in the back. Sometimes it's the small choice to trade loyalty for glitter, to mistake sacrifice for weakness. Emily believed she was choosing a richer life, but in the end, she lost the only wealth that mattered: love, trust, and respect. So Al, if you were in Jake's place, would you forgive? Or would you walk away with your pride intact? Don't forget to like and subscribe for more interesting and true-to-life stories.